Welcome to Off the Post. I'm Russ Cohen. We've got Anthony Mingione. Ant, how are you?
Doing spectacular, Russ. Sounds like Anna's doing pretty well, too.
She's doing good. I can't currently corral her because I can't really move. I fractured a toe, so Anna's like, she's got me. If she wants to make noise, she's really got me. And we have Michael Jello. Mike, how are you?
Yes, the Off the Post spokes cat has spoken.
Yep, but they dragged her away. It's fine. And we also have Kevin Allen from Detroit Hockey Now and noted author and friend. Hey, Kev, how are you?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here with you guys.
All right. So let's talk about the Red Wings because when I was on Sirius the other day, Mick Kern goes, well, I guess Detroit's going through their usual late season swoon. And so, why? Why does this keep happening? Why are we all conditioned to see this happening, even though every year they get a little closer to the playoff?
Yeah, I mean, it really looks a lot like last season, where they made a concerted effort to get into the playoff race and then had a major collapse. And, I think 6 losses in a row constitutes a major collapse here as well. And it's really surprising because Todd McClellan had done a masterful job of getting them to play the kind of hockey you need to play to earn a postseason spot. He had them, they for about a period of about 3 weeks, they were holding teams to 2 goals or fewer pretty much consistently. And he's been preaching, the race to 3. And only once, and since he's been coach, has the team that scored 3 first not won. So it's proved to be an accurate assessment of where this team is. But, it's gotten to the point that the last game they played very, very well against the Ottawa Senators, had 49 shots on goal, and they still found a way to lose. They ran into a hot goaltender in Allmark, and, because of that, they lost. And, that was just like the 2 losses to Columbus, which were 2 4-point games for an 8-point series. The loss to Ottawa, it was 2 points they didn't get and 2 that Ottawa did get. And, right now it's really looking like, Columbus and Ottawa are the teams to beat for those 2 wildcard spots.
Kev, it's strange that, and if my memory serves, the only thing that Yzerman did before the deadline was act as the middleman in the Yanni Gourde deal with Tampa, and then the trade with Chicago, moving Veleno for Craig Smith and Peter Mrazek, who's starting tonight for the Wings against the Sabres. Are you surprised that was the limit of what he did at the deadline?
Well, I was surprised on the day of that he didn't do more. But when I looked at it and took a deep dive into it, I realized a couple of things. The value of his first round pick is just much higher than the Tampa Bay Lightning or the Florida Panthers or the teams that are near the top. And just to prove that I was right, I went and looked up, and anybody who was going to pick in the top 14 picks, so getting under that 15 spot where we've talked before, where it's an 80% probability that you'll get we'll just call a significant player if you draft in the top 15.
Right.
As we all know, the bottom 17 picks are at 40%. Mm-hmm. That's how you get to the 70% for the first round. So all the teams that are in the top 14, including the Red Wings, who are projected to pick in those spots as of the trade deadline day, they still all have their picks. And remarkably, teams who picked from 20 to 31, those 12 spots, 10 of those teams no longer have their picks. So I think what we saw on trade deadline, and I think if we go back, we'd see that's the case, is that teams don't have the same value on those picks. But Yzerman couldn't afford to give that up. And secondly, he really had angled to get Cousins in Buffalo, but he was told, hey, Steve, we're in the same boat you are. Like, you're wanting to move prospects to get real players, which Steve Yzerman was, right. And we want real players because we got plenty of prospects.
Well, if you remember, Kev, was when we talked about this before, and I know I was just being the usual Mike Agello hard ass when it came to trades. No. I said if it's Dylan Cousins, they would probably want, a Lucas Raymond. They'd want somebody who's established and good. And, Josh Norris has got his questions in terms of staying healthy, but he may be a better offensive player and a more natural center than Dylan Cousins. So in the end, Kevin Adams sort of stuck to his guns and got at least a NHL player return in the deal for Cousins. And apparently the Wings were not prepared to do that.
Well, I mean, I think you're right on. I mean, I think when I looked at it again, after the fact, the only player that they had that would have been a center that was, offensive minded, Norris already had 20 goals this season, right. And he's had a 30-goal season in the past. The only player that could better that deal from the Red Wings perspective was Dylan Larkin if they wanted a center. So, and they weren't going to make that move. So I didn't blame him for that. He didn't want to give up his first-round pick for, there weren't really any top centers available. I was told by a pretty good source that Ryan O'Reilly had no interest in moving, that he's settled into there, has got a family, he likes it in Nashville, and the same was true of Braden Shen. If he turned down the Winnipeg Jets, he was going to turn down the Detroit Red Wings. So, I just don't think there was much out there that really appealed to them. And so, Mrazek, they like that idea because now they have two goalies, only $6 million paid for two goalies tied up for next year. And, I think the fan base in Detroit was worried about blocking Sebastian Cossa. But, my answer to that is how many 22-year-old goalies do you see in the National Hockey League? Because Cossa will still be 22 at the start of next season. We've seen what happened, certainly, with the 22-year-old goalies we have. Buffalo's got one that's, not in the at the NHL level this year. Askarov has spent more time in the AHL than he has in the NHL as well. And of course, Wallstedt, who is considered Costa's equal, has had a terrible time this year in the AHL. And Bloomquist, another 23-year-old goalie, was up, looked good, but where is he now? He's back in the AHL. So I think all along the Red Wings had looked at Costa thinking next year we'll start him at Grand Rapids, we'll see what happens. So we better have two veteran goalies are already under contract because, as Steve Yzerman said, the market wasn't going to be very good in the offseason for a goalie.
Oh, no, so, the free agent market for goalies is awful.
Yeah, that's what he said. So now he's got two. I mean, we can argue whether he's got two good ones or not, but he's got two.
And Devin Levi has thrived going down to Rochester after being sent down early in the season. The Sabres finally made the right move in terms of sending him down, and he's done really well for them. But the goaltending, and Anthony, I'm sorry, I'm running on here, but I'll just say this. I've said for a while, and I still believe that, after the whole thing with Broberg and Dylan Holloway with St. Louis and Edmonton, that you're going to see more offer sheets come around. And I've heard other people say that because the cap is going up and people are going to be more daring. Do not doubt. Do not, be surprised. Devin Levi gets offer sheeted because the goaltending market is so, barren of really good opportunities. And, he's blocked right now by Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. So he might be open to an offer sheet, and teams are out there that might pay $4 or $5 million for an unproven goaltender who at least has a little bit of NHL experience. So I think we're going to see that, but I'm just rambling. Sorry.
Kevin, wanted to ask you about the player that I'm endlessly fascinated with on the Red Wings, Elmer Soderblom. It's not often you see a player other than like in Matt Rempe class of his size. And I know right now he's playing on the with Larkin and Raymond. What has been your take so far on Soderblom so far?
Well, I think they handled him well. They sent him down to Grand Rapids last year, not this year. And he didn't like it very well. He had been playing in the Swedish Hockey League, and I think he might have sulked a little bit. And the word on the street is that, they weren't real pleased with his attitude. But he came back this season with a better attitude. And even though he didn't put up great numbers, I remember talking to Dan Watson, the Grand Rapids coach, and he said, he's playing really well. He just can't seem to get the puck in the net. And he says, but I feel it's coming. He's getting a lot of chances. Well, he got going later in the season. He did have some numbers, and they brought him up, and he's been very impressive. He's a big guy who protects the puck very well. He can skate. I remember I watched an empty net goal. I don't get impressed very often by empty net goals, but 6'8" Soderblom outraced everybody to get down to get a loose puck down there and tuck in the net. And, there was some pretty good skaters out there at the time. So he can skate. He protects the puck real well. He's getting a point every other game here. They just recently promoted him to the top line because they wanted to get a little more balance on the line. And they thought, he's a big guy. He's learned to use the size a little bit. He's not a heavy hitter, but he's effective now. He goes pretty hard to the net. He'll go into the board. So they're pretty pleased for him. And he's kind of got the forever stamp in terms of, like, he's up for good now. Like, they're not going to send him back down.
So, Kev, right now you've been writing about ASP, and Sandy Pellick is a terrific player, I think. I told you draft year, I gave you some nice quotes about him because I really felt strong about him. He's looked really good. You're saying he could come up after his season's over?
Yeah, and we got that from Steve Yzerman, who doesn't normally make those kind of judgments so early, but he said could happen is pretty much what he said. And, he did sort of preface it by saying, there's some history of us doing that. And if you look at the way the system works, the Swedish Hockey League ends on the first day of April. They start their playoffs. His Skellefteå team isn't very good. I think 5th or 6th in the league. So if they get knocked out in the first round, they could be done maybe by the 9th or 10th or 11th, depending on how quickly they get knocked out. And then, he'd have almost a week with the team. And then even beyond that, the AHL doesn't start playoffs till about the 20th. And
Right.
they have 5 rounds. And, Grand Rapids last year went a couple of rounds, so maybe they could do that again this season as well. So there's a real opportunity for him. And I think because he set the record, and, you think of all the top young defensemen they've had through the years in the Swedish Hockey League, he now is the record holder, most goals by a teenager defenseman in the Swedish Hockey League. He has 12 this year. And, just think of all the guys that have come through there and played.
Oh, yeah.
As well. So it's a pretty impressive record. I think the Red Wings are going to give him an opportunity in training camp. He may end up still in Grand Rapids,
Sure.
but they think he's close. They think he's a better defenseman. I see a lot of Rafalski in him, and when I say that, I mean because I think he's better defensively than a lot of people give him credit for. Like he sort of, if you remember, Rafalski used to squeeze players out along the board. He can't do that anymore. But Sandin Pellica has figured out how to defend one-on-one, and he can at least get a stalemate in most situations.
He's got a good stick. That's how he does it.
Yeah.
And it's really good.
Yeah, and I think that's what all you want out of a young defenseman. If he can just, have stalemates in the one-on-one confrontation until he really sort of learns the league, I think they'd be happy in that. But I give him, maybe a 40% chance of making it next year and for the opening game, but I would say it's probably 70 or 80% that he plays at some point next season.
Kev, the most fascinating thing that unraveled on deadline day was the Mikko Rantanen situation. 42 days in Carolina, didn't want to re-sign the contract, and they apparently shopped him all over. The reports are he was willing to go to 4 teams. One of them being Dallas. Another one purportedly was Toronto, and they approached Toronto about Mitch Marner. And then, of course, after the fact, everything sort of unraveled in terms of the Leafs asking Marner to waive the no-move clause and his agent and him saying, no, I want to stay in Toronto. But, they haven't even, according to Chris Johnston, they have not even negotiated anything, not one word all season. And I mean, if I'm Brad Treliving, I take that as a signal that he doesn't want to stay in Toronto, or if he wants to stay in Toronto, he wants to get overpaid, and they're not in a position to do that. So, I mean, everybody looks at Toronto right now and the trades that they made, and they're they have a chance to come out of the Eastern Conference. But the whole specter of the whole Marner thing, I think that's a distraction that could hurt them going forward.
I don't know. It's kind of hard to know. On the other hand, he's been pretty important to the team this season. So Do they have their best chance with him? I mean, maybe that's the argument. And I do think, and you'll all remember this because it turned out not to be true, but the general managers, when we first introduced the salary cap, talked about that, that cap space will have value. And even if you let a guy go, you still get something in return because you get that cap space back. And that's important. And we've seen how important it is. But nobody's ever looked at it like that. Like the fans certainly don't. They say, "Oh, you lost him for nothing." That's
Right.
the comment. But I do think people are starting to look at that more with the idea of, okay, yeah, we are going to lose him. We're not going to get anything back, but we do have him for this playoff run. And we'll have then the opportunity because not many teams have cap space. So we'll have it. So if there's another guy out there, the problem is there's not always a guy out there. But if there is, we're in good position to be able to sign that guy. So I don't know. Maybe that's how they're looking at it. I've seen Marner play this year a couple of times, and I've sort of been impressed by what he's done. I thought he was, really good when Matthews wasn't good and he was out, and because of that, that East seems like anything could happen to me. So maybe they just feel they want to go in it with Marner being part of that group.
Yeah, the big surprise, obviously, at the trade deadline, right up at the end, was Brad Marchand going to Florida. I wanted to know how. I was absolutely just my jaw hit the floor.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it really. I can speak to. I just think Bill Zito is really remarkable. I mean, of all people to end up with him, Zito, like it seems like he never has any cap space. And yet he always ends up with, the guys that he wants to get. And, bringing Marchand to that team that already had Tkachuk. Like, you talk about being hard to play against. You're going in there and you're facing a Tkachuk. And I just talked to someone who I really trust is a really good NHL person who said, and you watch Seth Jones now. Seth Jones is a big defenseman. Probably not as good as he was when he was younger, but he's never really been overly physical. But he's a big guy. Mm-hmm. But the guy predicted, because of his relationship with Tkachuk and because he's a good, loyal team guy, that when Tkachuk stirs things up, that Seth Jones will be first in line, because that's what Seth Jones is. And even though that's not the way he played, like he said, I expect to see a much more physical Seth Jones in Florida than we've ever seen.
Kev, I want to add one thing because I saw an NHL Network interview with Bill Zito, and he only got that trade in just under the wire. Like he actually was waiting for confirmation back, and he was kind of thinking to himself, he said he got a little nervous, like maybe it wasn't going to go through. So it does make me think that Marchand definitely got blindsided like a Brian Leach, and it seems like for whatever reason, Boston made this decision really last minute.
Yeah, they may have. I mean, I think, I think it's hard to give up on a guy that's been that important to your franchise, a guy that's been with you all along. I mean, that, say what you want about the way he's played and whether or not you like that style, but, it sure is effective. And the bottom line is this: with all of his antics, he's still a tremendous hockey player. I mean, a tremendous player. Like, so, I mean, I think that had to be a hard decision. And I don't know. I mean, where's Sweeney at the end of the season? I mean, is he gone?
No. Jacobs came out and gave. Well, we know how how when the owner comes out and gives a vote of confidence, that's the last thing that happens before everybody gets fired. But I'm telling you, and the first thing I said after this is that no player ever will take less to play for the Boston Bruins ever again, because Marchand took less, Bergeron, Krejci, Rask, Chara, and in this negotiation, apparently he went to management and ownership and said they were like $1 million apart, and he said, "I'll come down, I'll meet you halfway," and they said no. So honestly, it's like he was on a contract, an 8-year contract at $6.5 million. That's one of the best value contracts in the league. And now when it comes time to appreciate him and to show, like, okay, we appreciate you did this and we'll give you a little extra, they stab him in the back. So I mean, honestly, the Bruins, they built that team on everybody taking less. And in the end, the players are the ones who got screwed. And now I don't think anybody, Pasternak and McAvoy and Swayman got paid full value.
Yeah, they're there. They're not going anywhere.
Right, but nobody else, no one else will cut them the break that Marchand and Bergeron and that older group did. It's over with.
Yeah, well, and on top of that too, like the guys that I think were important role players are gone. They traded, Frederick, who I remember McAvoy telling me, he says the best athlete on our team is Frederick. Whatever we do, if we were playing tiddlywinks, he would be the best. He was the best at shooting, baskets. He was the best at golf.
I've never played tiddlywinks. I don't know if anybody on the panel has. I figured I'd ask that.
Yeah, no. Well, whatever. But I'm just saying, whatever they, McAvoy said, whatever they did, that was competition he was the best at.
Yeah.
And, usually you say that about a guy that you think is a kind of a blue player. And the same thing is true on Coyle. Like Coyle is just a perfect third line playoff center.
Yes.
He was miscast because he's had to play 2 this year at Boston. But he's a valuable guy come playoff time.
And Carlo is a big, tough, right-handed, rangy defenseman with 2 years left in a contract. And like when we were doing our show last Friday, Anthony was like dumbfounded that like, oh, Carlo's going to Toronto. Like, okay, everything is going. It's like crazy.
Yeah, I said fire. Once both deals went down, I was like, this feels like it's not quite a fire sale, but it sure is like it's a lot of key core component guys who got traded.
I mean, this is the defenseman that Toronto always has needed, but could never get at the trade deadline because nobody ever trades them. Nobody trades guys like Carlo.
And I know, Kev, there's been some talk like, well, the underlying numbers on Carlo aren't as good as maybe somebody else they could have gotten. They know that player very intimately from playing against them all the time. I know exactly what they're getting.
And he's a tireless worker. He's really good.
Speaking of numbers, we just put a guy in the Hall of Fame that I remember doing a story on because his underlying numbers were so terrible, and that's Shea Weber. I remember talking to Peter Laviolette when he was coaching in Nashville, and I said, I want to talk to you about advanced statistics. And he goes, you want to talk to me about Shea Weber, don't you? And I said, I do. and he laughed, and he goes, well, here's what I say about him. He says, because Laviolette actually pays attention to advanced stats, and he likes the analytics. But he said, here's what I can tell you about him. I know what the analytics say, and I look at all those things, but I've coached them all along. And if the game is tied or 1 goal with a minute to go, I'm going to put Shea Weber on the ice because that's what I see when I coach his team is that I need him on the ice. And, I think the same thing I would say about Carlo is true. I mean, we look at him, we know his size, we know how he plays and everything else. And I think you want him on your team when you're trying to win a playoff game.
Kev, something to ask you. I interviewed Capo Caco recently, and I'll put it up eventually. My injury slowed me down. But one of the interesting things he told me about was, when I started talking 4 Nations and Olympics, that, he pretty much knows he's on the team. About the Team USA group and team pretty well. I don't get the feeling that is the case for Team USA. Like, I can make an argument there's probably 3 or 4 spots up for grabs. But what do you think about that for Team USA in the Olympics?
I agree completely, Russ. I think there are some spots up for grabs because they didn't win. And, that's the way guys like Bill Guerin look at it. John Van Beesbroek, those guys that have a heavy say in what's happening. I mean, Guerin, there's winning and then there's losing, and he didn't win. So I think there are some guys like, the Kachucks, could already book their hotel at the Olympics if they actually, but they don't. And I think a guy like Dylan Larkin, who came in and, they asked him to be a role player. And I looked at his statistics on that last game, and he was, +1, like 5 hits. He won 57% of his
He was
face-offs.
miscast on the fourth line. I made a lot of jokes about him being a good fourth liner.
Yeah, well, but he did. That's a Canadian thing.
Yeah.
And a Canadian thing is we get superstars, we ask them to play roles, and they do it without complaint. And that's what Larkin did.
Yeah.
And he's popular with his teammates. He's tight with the Kachucks. And so I think a guy like him, I think you can pencil him in because they know what he'll do for them. He'll do whatever they ask him to do. And I do think there are some role players. But, like Patrick Kane has played well now that he's not injured again, and he wants to make one last push. Bill Guerin personally came to tell him he wouldn't be on the team this time. I don't know. Like, if he plays well, I think you could put him on. He handles the puck so well, still at his age, that I think you might consider him. He gets big goals. He's had a lot of game-winning goals this season.
Like, I feel like Kreider's not going to be on that team.
He will not be on the team.
Or Brock Nelson.
Or Brock Nelson.
I think Cole Caulfield has a chance to be on the team.
I think Caulfield should be. I don't know how you feel about that, Kev, but he's got 16% of his team's goals. Like,
for sure.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I do think, if there was any regret, do you think they had a little regret about that? So, I don't, I think we'll see some new players, to be sure, on that team. I think there's going to be, I don't know. Is Adam Fox locked for the Olympic team?
I think he will be. He's back to being healthy. I think if he has a good half season, he's there.
Well,
there's a lot of defensemen, I guess.
There are.
So we'll see.
I mean, Kev, I lost in all the everything that happened politically, the booing of the anthems and everything. It was a better tournament than I expected. But the thing that I brought up, and of course they're going to say, we just forget about it. That doesn't matter. The injuries that occurred in that tournament derailed. It derailed Boston because McAvoy got hurt. I think that was a factor in them making all the moves that they made at the deadline. Kachuk is out for the rest of the regular season. I mean, these are impactful injuries. And the goal of these owners is to win a Stanley Cup, not for their players to win an Olympic gold medal.
You and I have talked about this, off air. And what I enjoy most about this, and I'm sure Russ does too, is rarely have I ever seen you in line with owners, and you are so pro.
Never, not rarely, never.
Yeah, never. So I absolutely love that you are siding with the owners and Gary Bettman on this.
I'm a shill for the NHL.
He's sold out.
He's
sold out, Kevin.
I mean, I have to remind people of this, but owners are totally against international hockey. Always have been. They do not like to see their players at risk. Usually Bettman brings them along by saying, look, we need to do this. The players really want to do it. It's important to them. We've got to, make peace with players when we can. And so, he's kind of middle of the road. I don't think he loves it either for the same reason, but he sees it as an important chip for the players. And they really want to do this. And so I don't think it's going to change. But, the risk is real. I mean, the Kachucks paid a price for winning that game against Canada, the first one. So, getting in the playoffs is a very important aspect of the NHL. So, your point is a valid one for sure.
Kev, last one from me, and it would be remiss to not ask you at least one Flyers-related question. Just wanted to get your take on we guess this is going to be a Flyers and Leafs question here. Your take on the Scott Laughton to Toronto deal.
Well, I mean, it's overpayment, but in this day, you always overpay. I mean, he's, basically when the Red Wing fans said, why didn't they give a first-round pick and get Scott Laughton? I said, because they got a third-line center. His name's JT Compher. And Compher and Laughton are comparable players. Neither one of them are 20-goal scorers. They're good, respected players who get the job done. They slot up and play second line when if they're needed, but they're not, terrific number two centers. They're okay in that role. And I think so it is probably an overpayment, but Toronto is in a different position, than Detroit. Toronto's trying to win. Like I want guys that I think can help me win a playoff game. I think Laughton is one of those guys. I don't think he's an answer for a team looking for a number 2 center, but I think he's the answer for a team that wants really good, respected players for a playoff push.
Cool. Thanks, Kev, for coming on. We appreciate it. That's it for Off the Post. We'll catch everybody next time.
Take care, everybody.